Hey everyone, welcome to the 357th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have a stupendous show for you today. We're going to be talking about Sig Fox going into receivership, explaining all about how and why that happened and what it means. We're also going to be talking about a eye-opening report from Clarity about all the ransomware y'all are paying. All right. We also have a bunch of Matter updates. Y'all are going to want to stay tuned for that. And last week we had the CEO of Angie on the show, and now Angie is working with Walmart to do smart home installations. We'll tell you more. And in smaller news, we've got a new IoT satellite launch, Withings purchased a company, and Peloton has a new device. We're also going to hear from our sponsor, Writepoint, talking about building an app for the Moxie robot. And our guest this week is Simon van der Jacht, who is the CEO of Noe, and we're going to be talking about using energy harvesting to build plug-and-forget-it devices. All of this and more awaits you, but first, a message from another one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Hologram. You can own your own IoT deployment with Hologram's global SIM card. Their secure SIM connects your devices to more than 470 carriers around the world. SIMs automatically connect to the strongest signals, so you can trust that you'll get connected and stay connected. To learn more, visit hologram.io/StaceyOnIoT and test drive Hologram today with a pilot SIM and a megabyte of data. That's hologram.io/StaceyOnIoT. I should also mention that we actually have a very rare opportunity. It is an open ad slot for the coming month because one of our sponsors would like to move. So if y'all have a campaign that you'd like to run in March or April, give us a shout. For that, you can reach out to Andrew at StaceyOnIoT.com. Okay. All that stuff aside, let's talk about, well, this isn't exactly fun stuff, but it's definitely IoT stuff.
It is.
Sig Fox, which is a French low-power wide area network startup that came out, in like 2010-ish? 2010. They've raised over $300 million in venture funding to build out this network. The network is mostly in Europe and Africa and parts of Asia. It's less so here in the US. And okay, they have filed for the French equivalent of Chapter 11 bankruptcy in France. And this is really sad news, but it's not unexpected. So Sig Fox has been struggling for a while. A year ago, it replaced its CEO. It had also started selling its networks to partners. Like Sig Fox has a really interesting business model where it would create a partnership with the company that would actually buy all of the equipment to run the network from Sig Fox, but it would actually provide the partner company would provide the backhaul and services and install it. And so Sig Fox made money by selling that equipment to the partners, and it would take a cut of the revenue. It was kind of like a McDonald's franchise is how I see it. So that's how it worked, but it wasn't working super well. We've been actually reporting small problems with the network for the last probably 3 to 4 years. And the challenge, Sig Fox blames its going into receivership on COVID. But really, there are a couple issues here.
Yeah, there were issues before COVID hit, but yes.
Yeah. Part of the issue, so a big challenge for Sig Fox is its low power wide area network, which basically sends little bits of data cheaply as possible. It was proprietary, and people really don't love proprietary networks, especially because we started seeing networks like LoRaWAN networks open up and become a little bit more accessible to people. So that's one challenge that Sig Fox had. The other challenge it had was as it was struggling, people knew, and then companies did not want to partner with it to set up their own Sig Fox networks, which then caused kind of a cash crunch because Sig Fox makes, in the early days, it made most of its money selling the hardware, and then it was supposed to make money on, the network as it grew. But once it started struggling, people were like, I don't want to buy into that network, both like new franchisees, as it were, and companies that were buying Sig Fox-based connectivity. So that's kind of what happened with Sig Fox.
I feel bad for the company because they tried to pioneer this at least 5 years before the LoRaWAN alliance got started. But I also feel bad for the customers because this is not what I would say a small company in terms of its customer base. They have support in 75 countries and the network has over 20 million connected devices. I mean, it's not in the billions, but 20 million is still a lot.
It is. And so what's happening is Sig Fox, under the French receivership rules, has 6 months to basically say to find a buyer, find someone willing to infuse more cash, or to find a buyer for the tech that might keep it operational. We just don't know. Then after that period where it tries to figure out what it's doing, it has another 6 months to then work with creditors to figure out how to pay them back. At the end of that 1 year period, the bankruptcy court will then be like, hey, look, you're either done or you've got another 6 months to figure this out, or we just liquidate it all and nobody gets anything, right? So it's a little uncertain. I'm just going to throw this out. It is an election year in France, and the French government has put in a loan to Sig Fox that it's responsible for. So it could possibly become a shareholder in Sig Fox if Sig Fox can't replace this loan. Because it's an election year, because Sig Fox is part of this whole like Vive la France tech circle, it is possible that the government might step in and try to push a French company to invest in Sig Fox. So basically, we're going to be waiting for 6 months to see what might happen here. And it's too soon to say what happens to the customers.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a financial challenge, but I think the bigger challenge is a technological one. Because if you're one of those current customers, do you want to stick with a proprietary network when there are other options that are non-proprietary and more open? Yes, you have to replace devices, but in the long run, it's probably the better play, depending on what happens. I just don't see a happy ending here for anybody, quite honestly.
Well, the happiest ending would be someone buying the network, deciding to operate the Sig Fox network until its end of life, right? Some viable end of life, and then converting all of the devices that are on Sig Fox over to something like LoRaWAN.
Transition, right? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, that would be the ideal situation here.
Yep.
Or Sig Fox suddenly finds a money tree and is like, Viva! Yes! But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm still looking for my money tree. All right. Other scary news. Man, we are just like, this is the bad news podcast. Clarity, which is an industrial IoT cybersecurity company, they just released a survey today of 1,100 IT and OT security professionals, and they found some crazy things. First up, crazy thing.
This is hideous. When I saw the numbers, this is hideous.
All right, so the big news from this report is related to ransomware. 80% of respondents experienced some kind of ransomware attack. 47% said that ransomware attack impacted their OT and industrial control system environment. So think Colonial Pipeline-esque. And then more than 60% paid the ransom. And just over half, at 52%, paid more than $500,000.
And quite a few of those that paid, I'll say a significant amount paid well over $1 or even $5 million.
That is nuts. So ransomware is just generating some bank for bad guys. And good news for anybody who's working with these companies, more than 90% did disclose this incident to shareholders and or authorities. Yay.
Yeah. But they were also asked about legalities around should it be legal or illegal to pay the ransom. And that's kind of, I'd say, split on that. And that's fine. I don't care about that. In terms of disclosure, it's really interesting because they were all asked, should it be legal or illegal to pay the ransom after being impacted by the ransomware? And 77% of the respondents said, yes, it should be legal. But what's interesting is there's a split between those people because 36% total said yes, it should be legal to pay the ransomware, but there should be no requirement to report to regulators or authorities. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, you should totally have to report these things.
Yeah.
And so what we're seeing in 2021, which was a bad year for hacks, the double whammy of Colonial Pipeline and JBS, which was when the meat companies were hacked, the meat packaging companies, processing, that's what meat processing companies were hacked, has basically acted like Mirai did back in 2016 on IT security. So in 2016 with Mirai, suddenly everyone was like, holy cow, we have all these unsecured devices on our IT networks and they can be harnessed to get into the network and then used to like do these massive DDoS attacks. What's happened in 2021 with Colonial Pipeline and JBS is people have realized that hackers can go after IT networks, but because the IT and operational networks are so closely intertwined, you end up having an impact even with something like ransomware, which you wouldn't think about for your like industrial control system. So this is going to be like a come to Jesus moment for the cybersecurity industry, or it's a second coming to Jesus moment, a second coming. I don't know. Anyway, that's a terrible, I don't know. We're not going to go further on that, but basically this report gives tons of data on, hey, how much did you pay in ransomware? How much would the downtime have cost y'all? And what was kind of stunning to me is the perceived downtime from these attacks would have cost somewhere like, it's a big range, but basically 28% of the respondents were like, it'll cost us between $100,000 and $500,000 an hour. About 22% were like, it'll be between $500,000 and $1 million an hour. And a smaller 14.5% were like, it'll cost us between $1 and $5 million an hour, which is crazy. So basically, you got to pay up because when you think about the downtime, you're basically going to give an hour's worth of downtime as ransomware, which, yeah, I'd pay that too.
It's a lot, yeah. But I have to call out one other statistics because I'm befuddled by this. Which of the following has your organization implemented for OT remote access? And multiple answers were permitted. VPN, these are global respondents. I'm not going to break it down by region because it's mostly the same. VPN, 44%. Okay, that's a little lower than I would have thought, but okay. But then the next one, username and password, only 56.7% for remote OT system access. What, you just dial it up and do whatever you want?
I don't know. And 30% of those people are sharing their passwords.
Yeah.
Yikes. So
I love the 7.73%. Nothing. We've implemented none of these.
I know. There's the percentage of companies doing nothing has definitely gotten smaller. It's smaller, but
it should be a
zero,
a percentage of a percent, not 7.73% globally from these respondents.
Yeah, and a lot of people probably could do a little bit more. There's There's about, let's see, there's about 13% and almost 3% that the 3% don't know what's happening. And then the 13%, they either don't have or they're not proactively assessing any sort of risks. They're just reacting.
When it happens, it happens.
So that feels a little too high.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so that's not great news. Let's talk about some good news.
Well,
good-ish news. So first off, we'll say it's good news if you own a Yale Assured Lock. And I'll just fess up. If you follow me, if you get the newsletter, I screwed this story up. I'll just be real. Here's the scoop. If you own a Yale Assure Lock, a Zigbee, a Z-Wave Yale Assure Lock, you'll be able to swap out the module for something that's Matter compatible when the Matter standard gets released in June. I'm hearing it'll be released around June. Maybe a little earlier than that, but probably not much earlier. So you can buy this. We don't know how much it'll cost. We don't know when exactly it'll be available, but Assa Abloy, the company behind Yale, is making this module so you can get backwards compatibility for that lock.
Yeah, it's just to take the lock apart, swap out the old module, put the new module in, so you've got your radio and protocols, and you're good to go.
Assa Abloy also owns August. A lot of people have August locks. It's unclear what they're going to do for the August locks. Now, most of them are Bluetooth only, so I don't expect them to get any update. August does have a Wi-Fi lock that it introduced, almost 3 years ago now. That's theoretically, it could be updated to work with Matter over Wi-Fi, but that's still And Assa Abloy, when I asked them, they're like, yeah, going forward, August locks will be Matter compatible, but that does not imply backwards compatibility. So, and they'll tell us more about that when they know more about that on the Matter front. So, reminder, I should have explained this. Matter, if you're not aware, is the smart home interoperability standard that we've been waiting for since it was announced in December 2019. And basically, this is going to allow a lot of our connected home devices to interoperate and talk to things like Google and Amazon and Apple in ways that are not
easy.
Yeah, in easier ways. We'll just go easy. But It's been delayed. Like they announced it in December 2019. They said, it'll be ready in a year. And let's give them credit. The pandemic, that messed up a lot of plans. So, they were like December 2020. They were like, it's coming next year. But then the pandemic struck. And then they're like, it's coming a little later this year. And then they were like, now it's going to come in sometime in 2022. The first part of 2022, which is kind of where we are.
I believe them this time.
I do. I mean, they're very close. I mean, they're definitely making a lot of progress. But because of that, there's been some companies who are like, why would I put out a product now when I can just wait for Matter? And that seems to be what's happening with Nanoleaf.
And that surprises me. I didn't realize this, but I didn't hear it at the time. But at CES, Nanoleaf CEO Jimmy Chu had told Android Central that they are delaying plans for new products and updates so they can time everything with the Matter full release. And I understand that. I mean, you're right. Why would you want to implement and then re-implement or design a product that may not be upgradable and so on? There's just too much up in the air. But Nanoleaf's been among the forefront of devices for Thread support, which isn't required for Matter, but
it's one of the two wireless protocols that will work with Matter, along with Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and Eve is one of the other companies I immediately think of because they've been upgrading to Thread rather rapidly compared to the rest of the industry, and they don't seem to be delaying products that we can tell because they're coming out with new products. So I was just surprised by this news. I guess I shouldn't be because as the spec release date keeps changing, if you're a hardware device maker, you can't just run a 500,000 products through a production line and say, we need to change them all now. I mean, it's just not cost effective.
Right. It's just not practical. So, all right. So that's the latest on Matter. The other smart home news, Walmart has partnered with Angie, which used to be known as Angie's List and is an amalgamation of Angie's List and Handy. They're basically working with Angie to do some DIY projects around the home, like, hey, mount a TV, set up an AC. But they also are going to do smart home projects because as Oshin Henrahan, who was last week's guest on the podcast, says that smart home updates are one of the top 3 home improvement things that have happened in the last year that people are actually buying. So Walmart has partnerships with other companies, but they're going to also add smart home installations like installing a doorbell, a smart doorbell, or that sort of thing. So I think that'll be fun. I also would encourage everybody for, some of the smaller things like installing a lock or a doorbell. I believe you can do it. I believe you can do it in an hour or less. I really, 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 really do. So
I would agree. I mean, these are not services that I or you would use. Probably not most of our listeners, but it is interesting to see, what consumer offerings and new revenue generation models there are for this. I've never used Angie or Angie's List for anything, so I'm going to make a statement here. It does not apply to them, but I have used like installation services through Home Depot and Lowe's, and I have never been happy. I mean, the quality control isn't there. I think they'll take any contractor and put them on a list and say, yep, here, we got a job for you. And that's been my experience. Maybe it's out of the ordinary. So I definitely am not interested in anything like this.
Okay. Well, there you go. Or find your fun friends. Like, I know I have helped like probably half a dozen friends install smart home stuff in their home. Mm-hmm. So,
just call us and give us your address.
We'll be right there.
If you live in Cabo, call me first.
Oh, there you go. Or Scottsdale, right?
Yeah.
In the winter, not in the summer.
No, anytime.
Anytime. Okay. All right. Some smaller news bits. Astrocast has announced the commercial launch of their satellite IoT services. This one's fun because it's bi-directional. You can send information up and down. And this is one of many IoT satellite services that are out there. There's Swarm, which was bought by SpaceX. There's Hyber. There are just several other companies out there that are either doing it on their own satellites or doing it on other satellites and creating a satellite IoT network. And this is important because there are plenty of devices out there that need to have global connectivity that doesn't need to be constant. It could be like a couple times a day or maybe once every hour. And these sensors will just share data. Popular things are like, hey, tracking wildfires in remote places or tracking shipping containers in the ocean.
Yeah, places where you wouldn't have any connectivity at all. I mean, it's ideal.
Yeah. So Astrocast is launching. They'll have their services, and they say it's going to cost something comparable to a cellular network connection, which is good because satellite networks are usually much more expensive. All right. We'll keep an eye on that. Other small news, Withings, which makes a bunch of connected health devices that are really good, actually. They have now purchased a workout app called 8Fit.
I've never heard of 8Fit, but apparently it's not bad in terms of revenue. They're generating $1 million in monthly revenue with subscriptions.
Yeah. And I mean, it's mostly European. That makes sense. Withings is pretty big in Europe. It's another French company. And kind of what I take away from this particular announcement is that you can no longer have a like wearable device or a connected device. They make a wearable, they make a scale, they make blood pressure monitors, that sort of thing. And to really generate, you can't just sell hardware. You have to have some subscription providing product. And because Withings is focused on health and wellness, it makes sense that they would have a workout app.
They should have bought Peloton. No, I'm kidding.
No, but we do have Peloton news.
We do. It's actually a new device, and it's actually one I can afford as well. Otherwise, it's kind of useless by itself, but that's okay. I think we had heard rumors of this about 6 months ago, but it's now legit. Peloton has a $90 heart rate monitor that you wear on your forearm. And basically, it's just going to do heart rate. It's nothing super fancy. It does support Peloton's Strive score metric. So that tracks how long you've been in certain heart rate target zones, which is definitely useful. I mean, if you already have a Peloton, what's another $90, right? I mean, that's why not?
And apparently this is actually a pretty good. So the reviews that I've seen, like PC Mag did a review. It sounds like it's actually a really decent heart rate monitor. So, and instead of a chest strap, it sounds like it's almost comparable to a chest strap monitor, which I don't know about you, but I hate wearing them.
Yeah, they're no treat. I mean, they're probably more accurate than most, but they are uncomfortable and whatnot. Yes, I would agree.
This goes higher up on your forearm, and it seems to deliver chest strap quality as opposed to like wristband quality, which I think is pretty good. And my understanding is it will also work with things outside of the Peloton ecosystem.
Well, I mean, because actually, yes, you're right. And as I read a little further here, the heart rate band will work with third-party applications that support standard Bluetooth heart rate monitor profiles. So sure, I could actually buy this and use it with my treadmill, for example, which is certainly not made by Peloton. Same with my wife's bike. You know,
I thought I might use it with my rower. I would see if it works with the. I have a Concept 2 rower, and it supports Bluetooth-based heart rate monitors, so that would be super awesome.
Yeah, I see. Now we wear Apple Watches, so we have the heart rate monitoring right on our wrist, and it seems perfectly acceptable in terms of how accurate it is. It really only integrates through Apple services for the most part. I don't know that we've ever tried it with a third party app. I suspect it does not work.
So I have the Fitbit, and the Fitbit is notorious for being kind of bad as you start exercising.
Kind of when you want it to be good.
Yeah, when you want to know your heart rate information, it's like it gets a little wonky. So I actually am kind of like, oh, I might try this out just to see if it gives me better results just because when I row, I get kind of frustrated because I know I'm working harder than my Fitbit says I am. Because my Fitbit half the time is like, you're not even in the zone yet. And I'm like,
Well, one thing I do like about this, I mean, I look at my Apple Watch periodically to check my heart rate or whatever. This actually does have 5 LED lights because there are 5 target heart zones. So with a quick glance, you can just see if you're in the zone or not, which, you don't have to be bothered with like looking at screens and flipping through menus to find that information.
That is true. So, as someone who's trying to train in a particular heart rate zone, this actually might be a really nice accessory. Yeah. Maybe I'll try it. All right. All right. That concludes the news portion of the show. Let us go now to the Internet of Things podcast hotline. This is the part of the show where we hear from y'all. You can ask us questions, share stories, and through it all, you will be entered to win a connected product. So this month, the IoT Podcast Hotline is sponsored by Spindance, which can help you design, build, and support your IoT product. You can learn more at spindance.com. And this is the beginning of the next month, the beginning of February, which means we have a winner from January. And January's winner wins a connected garage door opener of their choice. And that winner is Michael from Rochester.
Yeah, we actually answered his question, I think, 2 or 3 shows ago.
Yeah, that's true. Michael, you wanted to make your Nest thermostat work with your Amazon Echo. Maybe we should instead send you a Google Home device. I'm not making fun of you, Michael. I'm sad because this is the smart home today. It just doesn't work as well as we want. All right. So, Michael, you'll hear from me, and congratulations. And if you would like to be entered to win for the month of February, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And Kevin, why don't you tell them what they'll win?
Well, I don't want to say this was my suggestion, but I kind of nudged you a little bit. It's actually the Firewalla Blue Plus device. I have tested the Firewalla, 3 different Firewalla devices. These are used to basically monitor all of the network traffic in your home so you can see where all your data is going, what country, what server, what IP address. I think it's phenomenal. So.
Yes. So any self-respecting IoT nerd should have this just to see where their device traffic is going. I know y'all are excited. All right. And if you're not excited, you should still call and see if you can win because, why not? We'd love to hear from you. All right. Now it is time to hear this week's question, which actually isn't a question. It's a good idea from Matt. Let's hear it.
Hi, Stacy. Hi, Kevin. I'm calling not with a question, but to share creative use of IoT that helped me and my wife recently in a time of need. My wife had surgery last week. She's doing well, but she's in a lot of pain and requires bed rest, and the bedroom's on the 2nd floor. So my office is in the basement. She needed a means to be able to call for me if she needed something, and so granted we could have used our phones, but at least initially, she didn't even have the energy or desire to pick up the phone to do that, and her throat was sore. Then it hit me. I had a couple extra wise plugs that I had around the house. So I made one plug, the call button, which I situated within arm's reach of her, and the other plug, I call it the mat signal. That button is connected to a lamp in the basement. I then created a rule in the Wise app where the basement plug would come on if the button next to my wife was pressed. Voila, I have an instant nurse's station like in the hospital. It works like a charm, and I've since expanded it to include some other Wise bulbs throughout the house just in case I'm not in the basement when she calls. She's already up and about, recovering well, but if she does go to lay down, it's nice to know she can call for me if she needs help. I thought this unusual use of IoT would be something listeners would be inspired by, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. Thank you so much. Love the show.
Matt, you had me at smart button. Actually, you never said the word smart button, but that's exactly what you've built. And I love it because I think this is where the smart home can excel. We actually built a similar button. We actually used Lutron lights and a Pico remote to act as our call button for our 15-year-old daughter. So we programmed it to turn the lights on in her bedroom and in the living room to like call her up for dinner. And it works like a charm.
And I was actually at first thinking, oh, he used a physical button. He added a new button device to his smart home. But Matt didn't. He's kind of repurposing the built-in button that is prevalent on, I think, almost
all switches. If you don't have this button, don't buy that switch.
Yeah. I mean, most smart plugs have that manual, little button to turn things on and off. So even without anything plugged into the smart switch near his wife, she can just hit the button, which would turn on the power to that outlet. But that's a trigger event for turning on the power to the lamp where Matt is. So it's a great way to repurpose one IoT device without having to add another one to your smart home.
Yeah. I was like, go recycling, because who doesn't have like half a dozen smart plugs just littering their home?
Oh yeah. Who doesn't?
I don't know. I feel like I'm just like drowning in smart plugs.
Most people probably do not. You and I do, yes. I mean, I grabbed 3 real quick before the show just because I was looking for one wise. But no, most people do not. But I could see most people buying smart outlets.
You can buy an Amazon one for like $5. I mean,
exactly. But I also don't want to overlook the benefit of having a dedicated smart home button, an actual button, which they can be pricey. I mean, you can spend up to $50 for a smart home button, but they're programmable, completely programmable. So they're reusable and they're handy in a pinch. I mean, if I had an IoT emergency kit for my smart home, I'd have a button in it.
Yeah. So I have like half a dozen different buttons.
Well, doesn't everybody?
Okay, maybe not. So for my smart button with my Phillips Hue, I actually did, this is a new thing. I haven't talked about it. So I have a Phillips Hue smart button. It was $20, $19.99. And I actually used it to I put a Phillips Hue color changing bulb into my living room lamp. And 90% of the time, probably 95% of the time, that bulb is just normal white light. But when I hit this button, I've programmed a single press of the button that I keep at my office, it turns red. And when it's red, that means I'm recording, which is a really nice thing to do because I've been recording at home and there are people at home during the pandemic. And so everybody then knows not to mess with my office. I wish the dog would realize it, but she does not. And she just claws at the door. But yeah, for everybody else, it's great.
I have a much more technical way to do that. I shut my office door.
Oh, that doesn't, but see, I still have people like singing Beyonce outside my.
I could put a door window sensor on it and make lights turn red in the house too, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But okay.
I like it. And I think other people who might be on conference calls or like don't interrupt mom or dad at this moment.
You were right.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Matt, good idea. Thank you. Remember, if you would like to be entered to win this month's prize, which is that Firewalla Blue Plus device, or you just want to share your thoughts with everybody else on the show or who listens to the show, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And that concludes this segment of the show, but please stay tuned for our guest, Simon van der Jagt, who is CEO of Noe. Noe is an energy harvesting chip company, and we've had a lot of those on lately because y'all know I'm excited about energy harvesting. But we have a really fun conversation about the concept of plug and forget it devices and what that might mean and how we can get there. So stay tuned for that. But first, a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Writepoint. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Writepoint. Writepoint is a global experience company on a relentless quest to make everything work better. And I have Ben Johnson, the SVP of Digital Products from Writepoint, with me here. Ben, I just wanted to ask you about how Writepoint is working with companies to make the Internet of Things work better.
So Writepoint has a focus on end-to-end IoT services. And what that means is that if you're just starting out on your IoT journey or you have several products in the market, our team of IoT experts can help you anywhere from strategy and ROI modeling to concept development interface design, software development, commercial launch, and really everything in between. We start any conversation about IoT around the idea of the experience a device will deliver for the people who use it. It needs to fit seamlessly into their day-to-day, and it has to make life easier. One great example is our work with Embodied on their robot Moxie, which won a Time Magazine Best Invention of 2020.
And I am really excited about Moxie and making robots approachable for young kids. So how was Writepoint involved?
We are really proud of our work on Moxie. Moxie is an incredible robot to help children promote social, emotional, and cognitive development. So Writepoint concepted, designed, and built the app that controls Moxie in a very secure way and assists parents in monitoring the progression of their child's cognitive learning tasks, or missions, as Moxie calls them. It's a really fun and engaging application with some great features that allow parents to have access to their child's weekly progress, activities, and deep insights to help chart your child's path towards a more social and emotional intelligence. I think my favorite feature is the really fun animations our team designed of Moxie that show up at different times in the app and help connect the experience of the app with the experience of the robot.
I also like how Writepoint and Embodied thought about security. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Moxie does to keep kids' data safe?
We always think about security when working in an IoT context, but when you're developing technology for parents and young children, it's incredibly important. So Moxie and Embodied are COPPA Safe Harbor certified, but what's novel about our approach to device commissioning is that the communication of personally identifiable information and sensitive personal information between the robot and the companion applications is end-to-end encrypted. That means parents can feel safe knowing their child's usage data is secure. This is facilitated by a public-private key exchange between the app and Moxie through a QR code during device provisioning. So even the company that develops Moxie has no way to access sensitive data without a parent's explicit consent and their private key. At the end of the day, all of the work our team did is to support in a safe and secure way a really amazing robotic companion that helps empower confident and mindful kids.
Awesome. So if someone wants to find out more about Writepoint, where should they go?
You can learn more about Writepoint, our work on Moxie, and our IoT capabilities at writepoint.com/IoT. That's RIGHTPOINT.com/IoT.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Simon van der Yat, who is the CEO of Noe. Hi, Simon. How are you doing today?
I'm really good. I'm happy to be on the podcast.
Excellent. We are happy to have you. So Noe is a semiconductor company that makes a energy harvesting chip. And y'all know how excited I am about energy harvesting because the IoT cannot depend on batteries. So Simon, why don't you just get started and tell us a little bit about why y'all founded Noe?
Yeah, so we founded the company really because we're in trouble with the project that we were working on. So this was really a university project at the time, and we were developing a sensor that was not reliant on battery changes, right? So we're trying to implement energy harvesting into that product. And what we found is that, well, one, it's very difficult. We needed quite a bit of know-how and tinkering for that to get to a level of functionality that was somewhat reasonable. But what we also found is quite expensive. And so we needed a lot of different external components, a bunch of inductors and other components. And that ended up being expensive, but also taking up quite a bit of space in the product. So it was a big and clunky sensor by the end of it. So we really had just quite an unsuccessful project. And maybe we were just being sore losers, but we blamed it on the energy harvesting technology that was available. And we said, we need to develop something that is fundamentally simpler, right? That doesn't require you to be an expert on energy harvesting to be able to get good performance, but also something that's fundamentally just more cost effective and smaller to implement into these type of products. So we started doing that in 2016, and I do think we succeeded in that. So if you look at the NH2 today, it is definitely significantly simpler, smaller, and more cost effective to implement.
And the NH2 is your chip, and you just sold your millionth one fairly recently, yes?
Yeah, we produced our millionth chip last month. in the grand scheme of things of IoT, that's a small number, of course. So our ambitions for this year are definitely a lot bigger than that. But I think it does show that we were able to offer something that's sparking a lot of interest, that's helping business cases work, right? Where traditionally it would have been difficult just from a cost point of view, for example, to really get that to work. So I think it is really helping there.
And I think this is really worth talking about because we've had actually several companies who are building energy harvesting chips on the show. We've had InOcean, we've had Wiliot, we've had Everactive, Atmosic. A lot of those companies, not all of them, but many of them actually produce both the energy harvesting silicon, but they also produce the end product. So Everactive sells the whole sensor. Wiliot, they sell like a pixel thing. InOcean, they do kind of both. And one of the reasons they do that is because it's so complicated to actually figure out how to engineer these things into a product. So can you talk about some of the actual challenges? So people who are like, why is that hard? Can you talk about why it's so difficult?
Yeah, so one of the things that makes energy harvesting power management very, very different from traditional power management is the source, obviously. And the source is extremely unpredictable. So if you normally have battery power and they have to do some power management to feed the different components in your system, then you know exactly what you're going to get. You get a nice and stable input from your battery. This is the exact opposite in the case of energy harvesting. You fundamentally do not control the environment. It's ambient energy harvesting. Right? So even the light in the room you're in right now, right, you might feel that's relatively stable light, not a lot of flickering going on. But if you would actually take out a lux meter and start measuring that, what you start seeing is that it's actually continuously changing a little bit. So every time there's a change in that input that goes into the chip actually has to adapt. So it does something called maximum power point tracking. So it essentially reconfigures its own settings to find the maximum power point at which it will extract the most energy. So if you don't do a very good job at finding that maximum power point, you'll have significantly lower efficiency. And so traditionally, this is something you needed to pre-configure yourself. And so you needed to configure that in a way where you kind of had to predict what's going to roughly happen into your environment that you'll be harvesting. And that's required external components as well to do that. And it's not that simple really in practice. So getting actually good performance to quite a bit of know-how. So I think what's been a massive improvement there. So what we've done with our chip is that we're actually measuring at the output of the chip. So we're measuring what's coming out of the chip, and then the chip is able to self-adapt to that. And so all of that is happening inside the chip. It's effectively self-programming and continuously every second adapting and finding a new maximum power point. So it's much simpler for you as a user because, quite frankly, this is not something you have to think about anymore. But it's actually also just a better way of doing it because it's faster that way, because everything happens within our own system. And it's fundamentally more accurate. We're not making an estimation of what the best setting would be. We're actually measuring what's coming out of the chip and adapting based on that. So I think it's on the one hand improves performance a little bit, but probably more importantly, it's just made it much simpler for people to get that performance.
This is also a trend we're seeing, partially because I think the IoT just needs so much more. You've got to scale out so much more. But we're seeing, I just talked to a company it's actually doing air quality sensing. But what it's done is it's built a specialized chip that handles all of the calculations on the chip itself and adds additional math to like exactly count as opposed to do an estimate. And, if I were feeling fancy in marketing, I might call it machine learning. It's not really machine learning. It's just doing some of that math directly as part of the chip to make it a little bit easier. In this case, it makes it more accurate than a traditional one at a lower cost. And yours makes it way easier for people who are like, hey, I don't want to learn anything about energy harvesting other than no batteries or better, more efficient batteries. Okay. So this is great. So along that line, I would love to talk to you about where you think the IoT is going. And I'll say this like back in I think it was 2016, it may have been 2017, Masayoshi-san, who was the head of SoftBank and had just recently purchased ARM, said we'd have like 1 trillion sensors out in the world. We're not there yet. I believe he thought we'd have that by 2025. I don't think we're there yet. We're not really that close. Let's talk about the implications for the chip industry when you think about putting that many computers out there. How do we think about that? How do y'all think about that?
So there's a few things I think. We started in 2016, and I would say that around that time, probably the Internet of Things as a term was kind of at peak hype. So there were massive expectations, exactly what you're describing. I think what happened for a large part during that time is that there's been a lot of different pilot projects. So people deploy 100, maybe a few thousand sensors. get very excited about the idea of having a smart road or a smart, garbage collecting system or whatever it might be. But then they run into very practical problems during those pilots. So the actual sort of conversion rate of pilots to high volume deployment has been very low. I think a big part of that actually in many cases is precisely the batteries, right? So it becomes extremely problematic to get a business case to work if it involves having to swap 200,000 batteries that are spread out over an entire city periodically. Right? That literally involves somebody driving around in a van, climbing up a ladder to do a single battery swap and then repeating that a few 100,000 times. And so I think that the total cost of ownership of a lot of these sensor systems has been incredibly underestimated. Right? It's much, much more expensive to maintain a system like that. So that, I think, has been quite a barrier there. At the same time, I think what's happened over the last, honestly, maybe year and a half or so, really quite recent, it feels that there's been a big shift there in terms of realism. So people, I think, are going for much more concrete business cases where either they're solving it with energy harvesting, right? So I'm a little bit biased, obviously, because we see a disproportionate amount of those projects considering we're doing energy harvesting. But also projects where they're more realistic about what the TCO is of that system and taking that into account in their pricing or the rest of their business model. So I think that sense of realism has started to kick in. So if you would have asked me the same thing 2 years ago, I was a bit more skeptical about where IoT was going in some ways. If you ask me today, I'm actually a lot more optimistic than I was then, because we see these projects just simply starting to finally scale up, and that sort of added sense of realism is really helping in that.
Nice. And where are y'all seeing demand for energy harvesting? Where is that sticking, as it were?
Yeah, so we're doing a few different things. So if you look at big application for us, for example, is television remote controls. This is something really quite different. But there are about 1 billion television remote controls sold every year. During the lifetime of a single TV remote, you'll end up throwing away 14 AAA batteries. So it's an incredible amount of batteries we're discarding. 2% of those get recycled. So this is massive environmental mess there as well, besides it's a crappy user experience. So really most of the big television brands are right now have either already integrated this into their next generation products or in the process of doing so. So there's a massive transition going on there. I can kind of guarantee if you buy a TV 2 years from now, it'll be rare to find one where you'll have to swap the batteries. So that's a big one for us. But if you look at more at IoT type of applications, a lot of it is typically just about replacing human senses, I think. For example, being able to find things, whatever that thing might be, seems to be very valuable, right? So that could be a container. That could be, a personal item, if with a smart tag, for example. But a lot of projects, in the end of the day, are about some sort of form of asset tracking, and then specialized for that application. Interesting thing there, I think, is that all of these projects, at the end of the day, work. Is that there's some sort of sensing elements, albeit temperature or location or just the identity of the product itself. Then there's a little bit of processing, and then it communicates that to the outside world. And it needs power to do all of these things. So what we're seeing, I think, more and more is that sort of from all of the different IoT projects we're doing, I'd say there's probably like 80% overlap if you actually open up the product and look what's inside. So it's part of the reason why at CES we announced together with Sig Fox collaboration and AC Micro together, where we're integrating energy harvesting directly into the connectivity module itself. I think there's a fundamental advantage that energy harvesting offers there. Because for all of these products, you're now dependent on the user bringing energy to your device. Right? We do that for laptops, we do that for mobile phones. So I grab a cable and I bring it to my device, or I grab rechargeable batteries and I bring them to my device. But at the scale of IoT, that just becomes impossible. And then all of these other functionalities of sensors tend to be quite self-reliant and self-sustaining, right? It's able to sense on its own, it's able to compute on its own, it's able to communicate on its own. So really power is the only exception to that, where it's dependent on the user. So it makes a lot of sense to integrate that into a larger module that has all of that other functionality. And as such, really create a sort of self-sustaining sensor nodes. You can use that in just about anything. If you want to be able to, like I said, do asset tracking, but it can be a lot of monitoring. But 80% of those applications actually very, very similar in terms of functionality.
Yes. And I'm interested in this just because, like Atmosic, for example, they do energy harvesting and Bluetooth. So does Wiliot. I feel like the integration with Sig Fox is interesting. So having that radio involved, what radios could we do that with? Because I'm like, yes, Bluetooth, it's so low energy. Wi-Fi? No way. So what kind of limitations does your particular silicon have?
I think it's not so much limited maybe on the power management side, but probably more on the harvester side. So if you look at the Bluetooth, so working on similar projects with other Bluetooth companies that might be specialists in terms of Bluetooth, but not have that much energy harvesting capabilities. For them, it's also interesting to collaborate with us, right? So and by doing that, be able to offer and sort of an energy autonomous Bluetooth module, for example. So a few of those projects in the pipeline as well. Similar, I think, is what you described. But if you look at Bluetooth, then a lot of those are it's short range, so that means you tend to be indoors. And if you're indoors, it tends to be that there's not a lot of light if you're doing solar harvesting. It's more the environment that creates sort of a ceiling to what you can harvest, and that the power management has a limitation there. But at the same time, if you go outdoor, you might easily harvest 5 or 10 times more power than you could indoors. So in the case of Sig Fox or MBIoT, for example, we did a collaboration with Nordic Semiconductors together on their MBIoT platform. We did one with LoRa for Murata together. And so all of these sort of longer range protocols, they require quite a bit more power, but then they're not transmitting every 1 second either. Right? So always the energy harvesting is sort of slowly trickle charging, and then you send a periodic message. And I think both of them are actually completely suitable in that sense, right? So if you do something indoors, you maybe have a little bit less power, but you also need a lot less power since BLE is so low powered. And then if you go outdoors, you actually are able to harvest a lot more power, but you also need more power to do something. So it actually seems to fit pretty nicely. If you go to the higher power protocols, so something like Wi-Fi you mentioned, then you still tend to be indoor, but you are still limited with what you can harvest, right? So there it really does become a bit more tricky. So I don't see short-term a lot of those applications coming in scope, unless for some maybe more exotic types of energy harvesting where they're doing RF harvesting with very dedicated transmitters and things like that, but that has its own challenges. So I think for the short term, we'll see a lot of Bluetooth-based things in-house and a lot of LoRa and MBIoT Sig Fox things outdoors. And that adds up to a pretty astounding number of connected devices in total.
It does. And let's go back to those early days of the IoT when we were all super excited about things like smart roads. Going further into our vision, let's imagine we have viable energy harvesting, viable long-range radios, and we start building out projects like that. What is a realistic life cycle for those sensors? Like, when I think of this, I'm like, yeah, it'll be super cool. And then I'm like, but are we just leaving like little tiny piles of electronics to rot in our environment, or what will that look like?
Yeah, so you gave the example of smart roads, which is a good one, I think. So when we look at roads, for example, we actually did some projects on this. So the typical road in Europe is there for about 10 to 15 years. After that, you actually just have to do maintenance, and the top layer of the asphalt gets removed and things like that. So still our roads still have maintenance, right? Nonetheless, it'd be useful to know how many cars are driving on this road. Or, if you live in the Netherlands and it's super cold in the winter, then it'd be nice to know whether the roads are icy, for example, and dangerous maybe. And so there is a lot of things you might want to be able to know from a road. But I think what becomes important there, and we often sort of call this plug and forget devices instead of the old plug and play, I get it out of a box and it works. For IoT, you actually need it to be plug and forget. You need to be able to place it, then it needs to be able to take care of itself, essentially. I do not want to worry about every single sensor node, considering I'm placing a few 100,000 over a massive area, right? And it becomes plug and forget when the lifetime of the device is longer than the lifetime of the application. In the case of a road, I was just saying, like 10, 15 years, and after that, the top layer of the roads gets removed anyway. You need to last longer than 15 years, really, for that to be a plug and forget type of application. And you probably want to design it in a way that it's able to live quite a bit longer than that, so you don't get in trouble with some of the first ones that start to fill. So you have a bit of a margin. So I think for every application, you end up kind of defining it in that way. If you look at a shipping container, average life of I think 7 or 8 years or something, you probably want to have a lifetime of at least more than 10. So you're definitely in the safe zone there. And so I think a lot of products get dimensioned to be plug and forget, because if you have to go back once, you'll kill the business case. It'll be wildly expensive.
I love that concept of plug and forget. That's how I wish my smart home devices were. They are totally not yet.
They should be, yeah. They can be. That's the good part. The bad part is they should be, and they're not yet. But I think they really can be.
No. I mean, and honestly, like if you think sensors are a little bit different, I mean, hopefully we don't have huge gaping security holes that need constant updating and that sort of thing. So there's also, I feel like there's a gradation of computing that we haven't really established. If everything's a computer, then we have to treat everything like a computer, which means we probably have to touch it a little bit more often, right? And we need to get to where sensors are probably not like that, so we can just scatter them everywhere. Okay, let's talk about selling semiconductors today and how the IoT has kind of upended that model. So you go from a company, Qualcomm's an extreme example, but for example, they had like maybe tens of customers as opposed to today where they're trying to adapt to serving thousands of customers. And y'all are obviously not Qualcomm, but I do think there is a bigger focus on developers and larger use cases for chip companies. And I'm just wondering how that affects how you design and how you distribute your products.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually extremely relevant for IoT type of applications, I think, as well. So one of the challenges with sort of tackling IoT or markets, I would say, or different applications is that it tends to be relatively fragmented. And so there's not one company that's selling 100 million IoT sensors this year. Instead, there's tens of thousands of companies that each sell tens of thousands. So from a sort of business development and sales point of view, that's quite challenging because you need massive reach to actually get there. So I think there's two things. One is you want to be able to offer things that make it very simple for people to do a lot on their own, because it's impossible to give that many different customers a lot of support. Part of that is kind of the whole design philosophy of our chip, so that fits as well. But the other part of it is that we're trying to collaborate a lot. So I mentioned a few of the collaborations we've done over the last year with Murata, with Nordic Semi, with Telink, with you name them. And with those companies together, we made different developer platforms that essentially get you 80% of the way there. Right? So you'll have connectivity, you have a bit of processing, you have a bit of memory, you'll have your power part sorted out. Right? You might want to play around a little bit with how you configure all these things and what type of sensor elements you put on it. But really, I think you're 80% of the way there. So that makes it much, much simpler for us to be able to support a lot of different projects than we otherwise could do. And so I think it's definitely, if you want to be able to reach more and more customers, then you have to essentially reduce the amount of time you spend per customer, or have a gigantic sales team, which we don't. So you have to kind of be a bit more clever then.
I understand you have a new chip coming out soon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So we'll be announcing a new chip, and it's essentially based on exactly the same philosophy as the NH2 has been. Is where how do we make things simpler, smaller, and more cost effective to get top performing energy harvesting in your product. And then when you take a step back and you look at what we're doing, is that one of the fundamental downsides of doing energy harvesting versus not doing energy harvesting is actually that you have to buy your chip. Right? So that alone is making it more expensive. Otherwise, you don't have to buy an energy harvesting chip. However, what you do buy typically is a power management chip. So what we've done with our next product is that we've actually integrated a lot of power management functionality that you're going to buy anyway. So there's a lot of things on there that are on your PCB right now. So instead of buying a new energy harvesting chip, you'll effectively be replacing a lot of the different power management solutions you would have on your PCB today. And you do that with something where it's very, very integrated and has a lot of energy harvesting capabilities built around it as well. So it's much more of a sort of complete power solution than we've traditionally seen with energy harvesting products.
Nice. And power management chips are hard to come by. So good on you. Well, I cannot wait to see how IoT continues to shift both. I'm going to go with product strategies and then just the chip market in general. So thank you so much, Simon, for coming on the show this week.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Internet of Things podcast. Please join us next Thursday and don't forget to subscribe. And if you can't get enough IoT news, I would love for you to sign up at www.stacyoniot.com for our weekly IoT newsletter, where we explain all kinds of things that we don't even get to on the show. Once again, thank you for listening and please subscribe.